Welcome back to another episode of the Electric Election Road Trip and Podcast. I'm your host, Benji Becker, president and founder of the Conservation Coalition, and we are sitting here on the docks of Wilmington, Delaware with Collin O'Mara, a good friend of mine, and we are at a distance enough to take off the mask. We just had such an inspiring conversation with Senator Chris Coons. Thank you, first of all, for helping set that up. I know he's been a mentor of yours for a long time. And obviously you're a mentor of mine, so this is like giving back, I guess. But there's so much to unpack from that conversation. But can you tell us a little bit about where we are and who you are for those viewers who don't know, and then we can dive into what we just talked about.
So this is Wilmington, Delaware. So it's great to be here. Basically with your crew here, I think we're almost at 1 million people right now.
Yes.
You're standing on the Wilmington riverfront. And so just imagine back, 50 years ago, a lot of the big ships from World War II, 70 years ago, were built here. But after the war ended, this was a wasteland. This was, old industrial dilapidated buildings. There was a lot of kind of nefarious activities in this area. I mean, it literally was like the other side of the track, docks. And there was a vision that kind of started in the 80s into the 90s to basically restore the entire thing. And so all these, every business you see here, all the ecological restoration, all the apartments and everything else, none of this was here 25 years ago. And so it's just like one of the great kind of brownfield redevelopment success stories in the country. And I think it's just a good reminder that big things can still happen.
Well, that's like that pro-growth mentality of kind of how we move forward on environmental protection has been really at the core of kind of what we've seen. It's that you can revitalize this community, build up businesses, and also protect this waterway at the same time, which is very important to the city of Wilmington, the state of Delaware, and obviously the broader community. So you at NWF have kind of played an integral role of kind of bridging divides in Congress to fight for environmental reform. Obviously, NWF does a lot more, and I grew up reading Ranger Rick, so I'm big fan of kind of like that more educational conservation work. But you've been able to connect a lot of dots in Congress when it comes to climate change and conservation. You've been really integral in getting things like the Great American Outdoors Act through the House and the Senate. On climate, you've single-handedly helped shape the agenda on climate in a bipartisan way. Where have you seen the success come from, and what do you think can kind of catapult that to an even larger level?
No, I appreciate the question. I think there's more that people agree on, right? But if you just watched MSNBC or Fox News or just read Twitter, you wouldn't believe there's these areas of commonality. And the conservation space, it's easy, right? Like everyone loves going to the park, right? Everyone wants to see like healthy bird populations. Everyone, maybe not all of them, but most of them, folks want to have, cleaner water and, slightly cleaner air. And so for me, it's like focusing on that 80% that we agree on. And I think, when you get to the members in particular, like they all care about their places back home. And so I think we've tried to do things that are going to drive real investment into their districts, into their states. So they have some buy-in. So it's not just some like esoteric, policy that, you hope works in the future, but something that they can point to back home saying, hey, I did this. And I think the climate's the same way, right? Folks want to make sure that the solutions that they're working on are going to help create jobs in their district. They create more opportunities for young folks, and make sure that folks who are working in, say, the energy sector don't have a future, that they have a future. And so I think that's the kind of place where I think, because, I'm someone who grew up working for Republicans, and I've worked for Democrats, there's not enough folks that want to bring folks together and not necessarily, don't worry about putting points on the board through policy, not just playing politics. I think
so we've got an upcoming, we're going to have a new Congress, regardless of what happens in November. What are some of the specific areas that you think common ground can be found in Congress and in state legislatures when it comes to fighting climate change?
Yeah, I think the biggest place is around infrastructure. We got somewhere between 20 and 40 million people unemployed right now. A lot of folks that are furloughed that think they're going to get their jobs back probably won't, particularly in small businesses and like restaurants and the like. And so you're going to need to put folks to work. And so what better to, instead of building kind of the infrastructure of 1950, let's build the infrastructure of 2050. And I just think, when you look at some of the big bipartisan efforts the last couple of years, they've been around water infrastructure, natural resource, natural infrastructure. And so thinking through it through that lens, that's not partisan. Everyone has that, the wastewater system in their community they need to fix. Everyone's got a, renewable energy project they still have to see developed. Folks have energy efficiency opportunities and all those great jobs. And so I just think as long as the stuff that we're working on together, it helps address kind of the simultaneous crises. So you simultaneously are addressing the economic crisis. You're going to be addressing public health crisis because you have less pollution. I think we do have to talk about the racial kind of reckoning and making sure there's opportunities for everybody. And the climate crisis, if you're having solutions that focus on all those, you're going to make progress next year.
So on that note, NWF obviously has a strong presence in some very rural states, and states that maybe haven't had as big of a voice in this conversation. What do you think has held those communities back, and what would you say to those communities as a reason to why they should get engaged?
I think one of the best ways to revitalize places that have been forgotten is through investments in kind of natural climate solutions, right? And so, we've done it, and we've made some progress on the kind of outdoor recreation economy and showing how that's an economic opportunity. But if look, I want farmers being paid for the carbon they sequester, right? I want foresters thinking as much about the carbon content of their forest as they are the number of board feet they're trying to take out of it. I think the same thing with grasslands and ranchers. And for the most part, the DC climate conversation going back 20 years has basically been a power sector conversation around technology, and it's been fighting kind of the technologies of the future pitted against the technologies of the past. And that's 30% of the challenge, and we got to figure that out. But transportation is another 30%. Ag's another 15%, industrial sector is another 20% or so, and those other pieces get forgotten. And so I would love to see rural state, folks love to hunt and fish, folks that are farming or ranching, being a big part of the solution. And if they are, then all of a sudden that coalition gets a lot bigger, because it's not just folks that have a vested interest in deploying technology or innovating technology, it's everybody at that point.
Well, yeah, I think we've almost oversimplified this conversation. When people think of climate change, they think of just renewable energy, and there's so much more to fighting climate change than that. And you've been working so hard on that. I mean, it's the sportsman community from the hunting and fishing lens. It's the agriculture community. We just visited 2 dairy farms in the Midwest talking about what they're doing to reduce emissions and runoff and pollution. It's also the transportation sector. We're driving across the country in a Tesla. And a lot of, to be quite honest, I think most people love Teslas and they know it's good for the environment, but they actually don't connect climate change and Tesla. And so it is cool. But we've kind of made climate change its own box and its own silo, and we've kind of delegated the other parts of this climate conversation to, I don't even know where. How do we get back to a point where we're talking about the whole lens of climate solutions, not just on the national level, but on the state level, where it seems to be at kind of a halt?
If climate equals jobs, we win, right? And that becomes a bipartisan message. If climate means, mainly regulation and kind of taking things away, it's an uphill battle, and one that's going to be battled in the agencies and the courts for a long time. I think it's basically making sure that we're actually driving investments in each of the major kind of sectors in a big way. Industrial sector always gets forgotten, right? I mean, I want to make sure that I want to build buildings with steel and cement made in America that has just less carbon in the process, right? And I don't want to be outsourcing that from China for the next 20 years where they don't have the standards and that we'd like. And so the question is, what do you need? So you're going to need some kind of carbon capture technology and some other pollution controls to make sure those processes are cleaner. I think when you have those conversations, there's incredible leadership at the states, right? If I'm Governor DeWine in Ohio and I'm trying to figure out how to rebuild my manufacturing base, I want the cleanest manufacturing that's going to serve the markets of the next 50 years, not trying to build back to when Eisenhower was president. And I just think the governors that are thinking that way on the Republican and Democratic side are going to have an early mover advantage. And the ones that are really thinking, they're not just thinking about clean energy. They're not just thinking about solar and wind and geothermal, but they're thinking about the entire kind of supply chain, entire economy. If we get to that point, then it's almost a rat race to try to who gets the most jobs fast enough. I just want to make sure, kind of 2 things. One is that we don't forget the natural solutions in the process, because, as Americans, we like innovating our way out of problems. But, trees are the most cost-effective way to sequester carbon more than, any kind of advanced technology so far. And then the second thing is that we do right by folks that, powered the economy over the last 100 years, and frontline communities that have been dealing with so much of the pollution. Because you got a lot of folks that, helped win the First World War, Second World War, helped build the American economy on the back of coal and gas and oil. I mean, we need to make sure we're taking care of those workers in those communities. If we do all those pieces, it's pretty bipartisan, right? I mean, at that point, then you're talking, ideally, more than 10, 15, 20 million jobs that we're creating over the next 15 years.
Well, it's almost just bringing this conversation back to its roots, right? It's allowing it to be revolved around actual environmental solutions paired with technological solutions. And it's almost like the race to the moon, but it's the race for American climate solutions. And we have to lead the world in these sorts of solutions, and we are lagging behind. We actually were just with GM, who talked about China's interest in electric vehicles, which has surpassed our interest, which is a problem. We talked to Ørsted, which is offshore wind, which you probably have worked with before, and they talked about how Europe is, light years ahead of us on that. We're conceding this issue to other countries, and we're also ceding the technology to other countries, and it's holding us back in a lot of the ways. So a final question that I have before kind of wrapping it up is, You just witnessed a conversation between a 22-year-old conservative environmentalist and a senator who is Democrat. What were your kind of takeaways of that conversation that, again, you so graciously helped set up, but what were some of your takeaways?
Like, I mean, I think, again, this falls in that category. There's more things that unite us than divide us, right? And like, you're both individuals I could admire greatly, for what you're doing. On paper, folks would assume that there isn't a lot of commonality, but when you get into it, there wasn't much you could disagree with. And I think he would say the same thing. And I think having that human conversation, right, and actually kind of getting into the nuts and bolts shoulder, like, I still think there's like 70-80% of the climate solutions that would be completely bipartisan, except for folks that are maybe ideologically opposed to any kind of action, because they just make sense. And so the question is, how do you get that stuff done and then fight over the other pieces, later, but like not lose the opportunity. I think my other big takeaway too is just the massive opportunity to kind of restore kind of the American manufacturing base. And Chris spends a lot of time thinking about like the connection between American innovation and kind of American production and exports. And I think a lot of the places that you just mentioned, like some of the wind technologies, some of the solar technologies, like we were ahead of the curve. Like we were the gold standard 15, 20 years ago. We made up some progress before, and we've obviously lost a lot the last couple of years. But I want things that are innovated in America. I want things that are made in America and shipped around the world. I mean, like they use the space race analogy, right? Like putting a man on the moon. Like most of the computing technology we use today came out of that. So like there's all the other goods that come out of it that made us a technological superpower of the world. We could do the same thing again. And this is where Senator Coons kind of always kind of coming back to innovation, and where that aligns with like the ACC's agenda around kind of the innovation R&D. Completely bipartisan again. And I want to get to a place where I'm tired of importing cheaply made solar panels from China and offshore wind turbines from Germany and electric vehicles from Japan. Like, I want it made here, and I want to rebuild our country in the places where you and I grew up. I grew up in upstate New York, you in Wisconsin. Like, folks are ready to work. We just got to give them the opportunity to.
And they need jobs. I mean, middle America and rural America, this can be the future of kind of their economies. And you hinted at it earlier, but with the farming community is struggling. But we visited a dairy farm in Wisconsin on this tour where they're capturing methane and turning it into renewable natural gas. And now those farms are getting additional dollars for their farming practices, and they're being revitalized because of this incredible solution. And now the incredible solution provides, cheap, energy to communities across the country. It reduces, there's all these benefits. So this isn't just about the environment.
And keep the farm, right? Especially at a time when folks are getting killed in trade wars and everything else. Like, I would love to have folks compensated for the energy they're producing, the emissions that they're sequestering, and like as a way to keep family farms farming and not turn into the next subdivision and I just think it solves so many problems if we get it right.
Exactly. So National Wildlife Federation has a presence all over the country, a really strong presence. We're traveling across the country right now, and you and I have fought alongside each other on a lot of battles. We are about halfway through our tour, and we still have a lot of states to go, a lot of really strong states that NWF has a presence in. What do you hope we find as we kind of go south and then back west? Yeah,
I feel like for those that listen to the conversation with Senator Coons, I think you're going to find there's more commonality. The assumption is, right, when you go down south, you're going to find more and more climate skepticism. Yeah. I don't think that's going to be true. This hasn't been my experience. Folks might have different solutions, they might have different areas of emphasis, but we assume the same insane debate in DC, it matches what's on the ground. I think you're going to see amazing things going on in renewable energy. Some of the most advanced things on like nuclear, for example, coming out like South Carolina right now. Some of the technology, some of like the massive wind operations in Texas. I think you're going to be surprised by just the scale of renewable deployment across the Southeast. Most of which because it was cheaper. And so, and all the jobs and all the workers that are there. And so I think what you're going to see just doesn't match what folks hear or they read on Twitter. So.
Amen to that. Well, thank you for having this conversation, and also just for the amazing work you do at NWF. For those who don't know about NWF's work, you guys don't brag about it all the time, but really the shift towards bipartisanship on climate that is happening is largely due to Collin O'Mara and the work of NWF. And so it's an absolute pleasure to be able to work with you, to have you on our advisory board, and to have you as a friend and a mentor. And thank you for joining us here in Wilmington, a beautiful place. Thanks for getting us outside today on this road trip.
You got another state off your list.
I know. I was in the 40s, and now I got one more knocked off. So I really appreciate you joining us. I can't wait for us to continue working together for years to come, and appreciate all the work of NWF chapters across the country as well, because I know they do such incredible work, and we've worked with them a lot as well. So we are going to close it off for this part of the conversation. The electric election road trip continues for the next few weeks as we start to head south. Really appreciate Collin O'Mara's leadership and can't wait to join you on the next episode.